My hands still tremble when I think about it. The cold steel, the clinking sound echoing in the suffocating darkness. For 5 years, those chains were my nightly lullaby, my husband's twisted goodnight kiss. He chained me in the basement every single night and told me it was for my own good. He said it was love. But how can love feel like a cage? How can love leave you broken and bruised, longing for a single ray of sunlight that never comes? I survived, yes, but a part of me died down there, in that damp, concrete tomb. And now, I'm ready to tell my story. Before I dive into the abyss of my past, I want to know, from which city or country are you watching this? This happened in a small, unassuming town in Kansas, a place that looks idyllic on the surface, but harbors secrets darker than any nightmare. Please, if my story resonates with you, if it fills you with anger or sorrow or a desperate need for justice, consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to my channel. Your support means the world as I unravel the threads of my pain. The day I married David, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. He was charming, attentive, and incredibly handsome. He swept me off my feet with grand gestures and whispered promises of a perfect life. I was 22, naive, and hopelessly in love. We had a beautiful wedding, surrounded by friends and family who all gushed about what a wonderful couple we made. Everyone saw the fairy tale. No one saw the monster lurking beneath the surface. For the first few months, it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. He'd bring me flowers, cook my favorite meals, and we'd spend hours just talking, planning our future. He said he wanted to protect me, to keep me safe from the cruel world. I thought it was sweet, a testament to his deep affection. He started becoming a little possessive, insisting on knowing where I was at all times, who I was with. He'd call me dozens of times a day, just to check in. I brushed it off, attributing it to his intense love for me. I was so wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. One night, after we'd been married for about 6 months, I was getting ready for bed. David was already there, lying on his side, watching me with an intensity that suddenly made my skin crawl. He called my name, his voice low and unsettling. I turned, a nervous smile on my face, asking him what was wrong. He didn't answer right away. He just stared, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the bedroom. Then, he sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and walked towards me. He had something in his hand, something metallic. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, inexplicable dread washing over me. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, and before I could even process what was happening, he had clamped a cold, heavy chain around it. I gasped, pulling back, but he held firm. He looked at me, a strange, almost vacant expression on his face, and said, "It's for your own good, my love. You're too precious to be out in the world alone." He smiled, a chilling, empty smile, and led me, dragging my stunned and trembling body, towards the basement door. Part 2. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled of mildew and stale earth. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted everything. There was an old, rusty furnace in one corner, and stacks of forgotten boxes in another. It was a space designed for storage, not for human habitation, and certainly not for what he had in mind. He led me to a thick wooden pillar in the center of the room, one of the main supports for the house above. My mind was racing, trying to comprehend what was happening, to find a logical explanation for this nightmare. He calmly produced another set of chains, thicker and heavier than the one already clamped around my wrist. My breath hitched. This couldn't be real. This was a bad dream, a terrible, terrifying nightmare from which I would soon wake up. But the cold bite of the metal, the rough texture of his hand as he guided my arm, it was all too real. He secured the second chain to the pillar, then attached the other end to the one on my wrist. It was tight, restricting my movement to a small radius around the post. I started to cry, silent tears streaming down my face as I stared at him, pleading with my eyes for him to stop, to tell me this was a joke. He just looked at me with that same unsettling, distant gaze. "It's for your own safety, my love," he repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The world is a dangerous place. I can't risk losing you." He then proceeded to explain, in a chillingly calm voice, that this would be my new routine. Every night, after he went to bed, I would come down here. He would chain me up, and in the morning, before he left for work, he would release me. He said it was the only way he could ensure my safety. his twisted sense of protection. My protests, my pleas, my desperate questions about why he was doing this, they all fell on deaf ears. He simply walked away, turning off the light, plunging me into absolute darkness. The first night was an eternity. The darkness was suffocating, the silence, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my own heart and the occasional creaks and groans of the old house. I huddled against the pillar, tears soaking my nightgown, my mind a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and utter disbelief. How could the man I loved, the man I had married, do something so monstrous? As the hours dragged on, a chilling realization began to dawn on me. This wasn't about protection. This was about control. This was about ownership. He wasn't afraid of the world harming me. He was afraid of me leaving him. He wanted to own me, body and soul, and this was his method. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me, a deeper, colder fear than anything I had felt before. I tried to pull against the chains, my wrists chafing, but they held fast. There was no escape, not yet. Part 3 days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and the basement became my nightly prison. The initial shock gave way to a dull, constant ache of despair. My body adjusted to the routine, if not my mind. During the day, I was free to move about the house, to cook, to clean, to pretend to be a normal wife. David would be his charming self, almost as if the nights in the basement never happened. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings, kiss me goodbye before work, and greet me with a smile when he returned. It was a bizarre, terrifying duality. I was living two lives, one of a seemingly happy wife, and another of a captive, chained in the dark. The contrast was a constant torment, a psychological torture that was almost worse than the physical restraint. I tried to talk to him, to reason with him, to beg. Each attempt was met with the same cold, unwavering resolve. "I love you too much to let anything happen to you," he'd say, his voice eerily calm, his eyes empty of any real empathy. I learned to adapt. I learned to use the few hours I had unchained to plan, to observe. I would scrutinize every detail of the basement, searching for a weakness, a flaw in his system. The pillar was solid, the chains unbreakable. The windows were small, high up and barred. There was no way out, not through brute force. I started paying closer attention to David's habits, his keys, his schedule. He was meticulous, almost pathologically so. The basement key was always on his person, or in a very specific, hidden spot in his office. He never left it unattended. My heart sank with each discovery of his careful planning. He had thought of everything. He had built this cage with precision, ensuring there was no easy escape. One particularly cold night, as the wind howled outside, rattling the flimsy basement window, a sliver of desperation, colder than the concrete floor, pierced through me. I was lying on the thin, grimy mattress he'd grudgingly provided, staring into the oppressive blackness. The silence was broken only by the distant tick-tock of a clock upstairs, a cruel reminder of time slipping away. I thought of my parents, my friends, the life I had before. Did they wonder about me? Did they worry? David had isolated me, slowly but surely, making excuses for my absence from family gatherings, for my lack of contact with friends. He told them I was not feeling well, or too busy with house projects. My world had shrunk to the confines of this house, this basement, and in that moment, a profound sense of loneliness, so deep it was almost physical, washed over me. I wasn't just a prisoner of chains. I was a prisoner of his lies, his isolation, his twisted love. And I knew then, with a chilling clarity, that I had to fight. I had to find a way out, no matter the cost. My existence became a meticulous study of David. I observed his routines, his moods, the subtle shifts in his behavior. He was a creature of habit, and that was my only hope. I started testing the boundaries, subtly, carefully. One evening, after he'd chained me, I faked being ill, groaning and clutching my stomach. He came down, annoyed but concerned, and briefly loosened the chains to check on me. It was only for a moment, but it was enough to show me a tiny weakness in his otherwise impenetrable system. He was paranoid about me getting sick. This was a vulnerability I could exploit, a tiny crack in his carefully constructed of control. I began to strategically lose things, a hair clip, a loose button, anything small that might fall from my clothing during the day, and perhaps, just perhaps, become a tool in the darkness of the basement. He would get frustrated, but he never suspected the true motive behind my supposed clumsiness. The hope was that one day, one of these seemingly insignificant items would be exactly what I needed. Every night, in the oppressive silence, I would feel around in the dark, my fingers searching the damp concrete floor, the rough edges of the pillar, for anything that might have fallen. Most nights, there was nothing but dust and despair, but I kept searching, fueled by a flickering ember of hope that refused to die. One terrifying night, David came home drunk. It was rare, but it did happen. He was sloppy, his movements uncoordinated. He still chained me, but his grip was weaker, his movements less precise. I held my breath, barely daring to move, as he fumbled with the locks. The click was softer than usual, almost imperceptible. I pretended to be asleep, my heart pounding in my chest, listening as he stumbled back upstairs. When the house was silent again, I tested the chain. It was still locked, but something felt different. Later, in the pitch black, I felt along the connection point, my fingers trembling, and then I felt it. The shackle wasn't fully closed, a tiny, almost imperceptible gap. It was still secure enough to hold, but if I could find something thin, something strong enough to wedge into that gap. I spent the rest of the night in a feverish frenzy, my hands searching the cold, grimy floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed something, anything. The air in the basement felt thick with desperation, each breath a struggle against the crushing weight of my situation. My fingers, raw and numb from hours of relentless searching, finally brushed against something small, cold, and metallic. My heart leaped. It was the hairpin I had strategically lost a few days prior. A simple, unassuming bobby pin, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. My hands trembled as I fumbled with it, trying to remember the precise angle. The tiny gap I had felt in the shackle. The darkness was absolute, a cruel shroud that amplified every sound, every ragged breath I took. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs, the distant creak of the house settling, and the furious pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I worked methodically, guided only by touch and a desperate prayer. The pin was flimsy, bending under the pressure, but I persisted. Each failed attempt was a fresh stab of despair. But the image of David's empty eyes, the memory of the clanking chains, fueled my resolve. I thought of the years I had lost, the stolen freedom, the shattered dreams. I thought of the outside world, a world I yearned to touch, to feel the sun on my skin, without the constant dread of being dragged back into the darkness. And then, with a soft, almost imperceptible click, the shackle loosened. It wasn't completely open, but it was enough. I pulled my wrist free, slowly, carefully, half expecting the sound to alert David upstairs, half expecting the whole house to come crashing down on me. But there was nothing, only the silence, and the chilling realization that for the first time in years, I was unchained. I didn't move immediately. The sudden freedom felt alien, terrifying. My wrist, red and chafed, pulsed with a phantom ache, a constant reminder of my imprisonment. I sat there, on the cold concrete floor, my mind racing. What now? I was free from the chains, but still trapped within the confines of his house, his watchful eye. Escape was still a monumental task, but this was the first step. This was proof that he wasn't invincible, that his control wasn't absolute. A tiny spark, barely a flicker in the vast darkness of my despair, ignited within me. It wasn't hope, not yet, but something akin to it. A fierce, burning resolve. I would not spend another night in those chains. I would not live another day under his tyranny. And as I sat there, listening to the silence, a new, dangerous thought began to form in my mind. He thought he was protecting me. He thought he was in control, but I was about to show him just how wrong he was. Part 6. The relief of being unchained was quickly replaced by a chilling new reality. I was still in his house, under his constant surveillance. My newfound freedom from the shackles was merely a prelude, not the escape itself. The days became a terrifying game of cat and mouse. David remained oblivious to my nocturnal liberation, or so I hoped. I would meticulously refasten the shackle each morning before he came down, making sure it looked exactly as he'd left it. My heart would pound in my chest, a drum solo of terror, as I listened for his footsteps on the stairs, praying he wouldn't. Noticed the subtle shift, the almost imperceptible looseness that indicated my defiance. During the day, I was outwardly the same docile, compliant wife, but inwardly, I was a coiled spring, observing, planning, waiting for the perfect moment. My focus shifted from merely surviving to actively strategizing. I needed access to his office, specifically the drawer where he kept the spare key to the front door, the only one he never took with him. It was a long shot, almost impossible, given his meticulous nature. But impossible was no longer a word in my vocabulary. I was tired of impossible. I was tired of being a victim. One afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to the house. It was a package David had been expecting, a new part for his car. He was agitated, insisting on signing for it himself, which meant leaving his office door ajar for a brief moment. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. This was my chance. As he walked out to greet the delivery man, I casually strolled past his office, my hand brushing against the doorknob. It was unlocked. My breath hitched. He had forgotten to lock it in his haste. The universe, or perhaps just sheer dumb luck, had thrown me a bone. I glanced at the delivery truck, seeing him engrossed in conversation, his back to the house. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the narrow window of opportunity. Every cell in my body screamed to act, but a cold fear still gnawed at me. What if he came back too soon? What if he suspected? Every second felt like an hour. My heart pounded so hard I was sure David could hear it from outside. With calculated swiftness, I slipped into his office. The room was meticulously organized, just like everything else in his life, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd inflicted upon mine. My eyes darted to his desk, searching for the specific drawer, the one I'd seen him open only once, but whose contents I desperately needed. It was the bottom right drawer, discreetly hidden by the desk's design. I yanked it open, my fingers scrambling through the neatly stacked papers and mundane office supplies. There it was, tucked beneath a pile of old invoices. A small, unassuming keyring. On it, among a few other keys, was the distinct shape of the front door key. I snatched it, my hand trembling so violently I almost dropped it. The urge to just run, to burst out the front door and disappear into the streets, was overwhelming. But I knew that wasn't an option. Not yet. David would realize I was gone almost instantly. He would know I had the key. And then, he would hunt me down. He was obsessive, relentless. I needed more than just an escape. I needed a head start, a plan that would give me a fighting chance. So, with a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself to put the key back exactly where I found it. The thought of leaving it there, of not seizing this immediate chance at freedom, felt like a betrayal to myself. But I knew it was the smarter move. It was strategic. I quickly scanned the rest of the drawer, my eyes falling on a small, worn, leather-bound diary tucked away at the very back. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion in my predicament, warred with the desperate need for haste. But something about it tugged at me. It looked old, personal, unlike anything else in his perfectly curated office. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out. Just as my fingers grazed the cover, I heard David's voice from outside, closer. Now, thanking the delivery driver, panic seized me. I slammed the drawer shut, the sound echoing ominously loud in the sudden silence of the room. I shoved the diary under my shirt, praying he wouldn't notice the slight bulge, and composed myself just as I heard his footsteps approaching the door. He walked in, humming a tune, completely oblivious to the silent revolution that had just taken place in his sanctuary. I felt a surge of cold, exhilarating power. He had no idea, and that, I realized, was my greatest weapon. That night, back in the familiar, suffocating darkness of the basement, I clutched the stolen diary. My fingers traced the worn leather, the faint indentation of what looked like initials, D.A. David's initials. A shiver ran down my spine, a mix of fear and an almost perverse excitement. This wasn't just a diary. It felt like a direct line into the twisted maze of his mind. I knew the risk I was taking. If he found out, if he even suspected, the consequences would be unimaginable. But I also knew I couldn't afford not to know. Knowledge was power, and in my current situation, power was the only currency that mattered. Using the faint glow from the cracks around the basement door, I managed to make out the first few entries. His handwriting was neat, almost obsessive, a chilling contrast to the deranged thoughts it held. The early entries were innocuous enough, detailing his work, his days, his love for me. But then, the tone shifted. He started writing about my project, about keeping what's mine safe. He wrote about me, but not in the way a loving husband writes about his wife. It was possessive, almost pathological. He described my movements, my conversations, my very existence, as if I were an exhibit under glass. He even noted the small ways I tried to assert my independence, twisting them into justifications for his actions. She almost talked to the neighbor today. Good thing I was there to remind her of her place. She needs protection from distractions. My stomach churned. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a deeply ingrained, almost pathological need for absolute control. As I read on, a horrifying realization began to dawn on me. His obsession wasn't new. It wasn't something that had developed after we got married. He had been planning this, meticulously and methodically, long before he even proposed. He wrote about finding the perfect subject, about training her to be completely dependent. He wrote about the ideal woman, one who would be entirely devoted, entirely submissive, entirely his. And then, he wrote about meeting me, about how I fit every single one of his dark criteria. My hands started to shake, the diary almost slipping from my grasp. The charming man I had fallen in love with, the man who had promised me a perfect life, had been nothing more than a predator, stalking his prey. I wasn't his wife. I was his experiment. I was his captive, chosen for my innocence, groomed for my compliance. Every whispered sweet nothing, every grand gesture, every seemingly loving act, it was all a carefully constructed lie designed to trap me. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than any chain. I wasn't just a prisoner, I was a pawn, in a game I hadn't even known I was playing, and the game, I now understood, was far from over. Part 9. The diary's pages blurred before my eyes. Each word a fresh wound, a testament to David's chilling premeditation. He meticulously documented his twisted selection process, detailing how he observed potential candidates, analyzing their vulnerabilities, their social circles, their emotional states. He described me, specifically, as the ideal blend of trusting nature and quiet desperation. Quiet desperation. The phrase echoed in my mind, a cruel mirror reflecting the loneliness I'd felt before meeting him, the longing for connection that he had so expertly exploited. He saw my innocence not as a quality to cherish, but as a weakness to manipulate. He crafted a persona, a charming facade designed to reel me in, to make me believe I was finally finding the love I deserved. He detailed how he subtly began to isolate me, making suggestions about how my friends were bad influences, or how my family didn't truly understand me. I remembered dismissing these comments as him being overly protective, a sign of his deep love. Now, I saw them for what they truly were, calculated moves to cut me off from anyone who might notice the subtle shifts in my behavior, anyone who might question my increasing withdrawal. Every argument I'd had with loved ones, every strained phone call, had been orchestrated, a puppet show with me as the unwitting marionette. He had systematically dismantled my support system, leaving me utterly alone, completely reliant on him. He had not just imprisoned my body, he had meticulously, cunningly, isolated my soul. The final entries in the diary were the most terrifying. He wrote about his progress, about how I was becoming perfectly compliant. He even mused about increasing the duration of my captivity, fantasizing about a future where I would never leave the house, never see another soul but him. He saw me as property, a living doll to be controlled and admired, a testament to his ultimate power. And then, there was a single, chilling sentence, scrawled almost as an afterthought on the last page. She still has moments of defiance, but soon, even that spark will be extinguished. That spark, the tiny ember of rebellion I had desperately clung to, the sliver of my old self that refused to die. He saw it, he knew, and he was determined to crush it. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about survival, about reclaiming that spark, and about showing him that I was far from extinguished. In that moment, holding his monstrous confessions in my hands, a new, cold resolve settled deep within me. He had created his own monster, and now, I would unleash her. The night was drawing to a close, and the faint light filtering into the basement signaled the impending arrival of dawn, and with it, David. I quickly, carefully, tucked the diary back into his desk drawer, making sure everything was exactly as I had found it. The cold key in my pocket felt like a brand, a constant reminder of the secret I now held, a secret that could either set me free or doom me entirely. I refastened the shackle, making sure it looked perfectly secure, the learned movements now second nature. chillingly so. I laid back on the thin mattress, feigning sleep as I heard his footsteps descending the stairs. He unchained me with his usual detached efficiency, his face expressionless. "Good morning, my love," he murmured, a grotesque parody of affection. I mumbled a reply, keeping my eyes down, not daring to meet his gaze, afraid he would see the fire of rebellion now burning within me. As he went upstairs to get ready for work, I went through the motions of preparing breakfast, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The key, the diary, the knowledge that he was not just an abuser, but a meticulous, calculating psychopath who had chosen me, groomed me, for this exact fate. The cold anger that had settled in my stomach began to solidify into something sharper, something more dangerous, a plan. I couldn't just escape. He would find me. He would pursue me, relentlessly. His diary proved that. He wouldn't just let his project walk away. I needed to do more than just get out. I needed to ensure he could never hurt anyone else again. I needed to make him pay. The image of the police, of justice, flickered in my mind, but quickly faded. Who would believe me? A wife making such wild accusations against her charming, respected husband. He had isolated me so completely, systematically poisoning every relationship I had. I was alone in this. And if I was alone, I would have to be my own justice. The day stretched on, each minute a taut wire, vibrating with my suppressed fury and newfound determination. I moved through the house like a ghost, observing David, every gesture, every word, now seen through the horrifying lens of his diary. He was preparing dinner, humming a cheerful tune, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He sliced vegetables with a large, gleaming kitchen knife, my eyes fixated on it. A chilling thought, cold and precise, began to form in my mind. He had chained me. He had stolen my life. He had planned my destruction. And now, as he stood there, his back to me, unsuspecting, I realized that his meticulous planning had overlooked one crucial detail. He had forgotten to truly extinguish the spark. And that spark, now fueled by years of pain and betrayal, was about to ignite into a consuming fire of revenge. The knife in David's hand glinted under the kitchen lights. A stark, terrifying beauty. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm in my ears. He turned, holding out a plate of sliced tomatoes. "Taste this, my love. Are they ripe enough?" His voice was casual, normal, a jarring contrast to the violent thoughts swirling in my head. I took a slice, my fingers brushing against his, and for a fleeting moment, I imagined pushing the knife deeper into the fleshy part of his palm. But no, not yet, not like this. This needed to be precise. It needed to be poetic. He finished preparing dinner, the usual bland meal he always made, and we sat at the dining table. The pretense of a normal life stretched thin between us. Every bite felt like ash in my mouth. I watched him, truly watched him, for the first time in years without the veil of fear distorting my perception. I saw the subtle twitch in his eye when he thought he was unobserved. The way he meticulously arranged his fork and knife. The almost compulsive need for order. This wasn't just a man. This was a meticulously crafted facade, and behind it, a void, a chilling, empty space where empathy and humanity should have been. That night, as the darkness descended and he led me to the basement, I felt a strange calm. My hands, usually trembling as the chains were applied, were steady. My breathing was even. He secured the shackle, his movements less precise than usual, perhaps lulled into complacency by my continued compliance. He turned off the light, and the familiar blackness enveloped me. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a cloak, concealing my intent. I waited, listening for the sound of his footsteps ascending the stairs, for the soft click of his bedroom door. And then, silence. I wasted no time. My fingers found the hidden hairpin, and with practiced ease, I worked on the shackle. The click this time was louder, more satisfying, a declaration of my liberation. I was free, and he had no idea. But I didn't run. Not yet. Instead, I carefully, silently, picked up the thick, heavy chain he had used to bind me. Its weight felt oddly comforting in my hand, a symbol of my stolen years, now transformed into a weapon. I crept up the stairs, each step deliberate, silent. The house was still asleep. A single sliver of moonlight pierced through the living room window, casting long, eerie shadows. I made my way to his bedroom door, pushing it open soundlessly. He was asleep, lying on his back, a faint snore escaping his lips. His face, so innocent in sleep, twisted into a mask of pure evil in my mind. The chain felt heavy, a cold promise of retribution. He had chained me for 5 years, and now he would learn what it truly meant to be bound. The moonlight, stark and unforgiving, illuminated the room, painting his sleeping face in shades of gray. He looked so vulnerable, so utterly unaware. A part of me, a small, bruised part that still remembered the man I thought I married, recoiled. But the overwhelming image of the cold basement, the years of terror, the damning words in his diary, quickly eclipsed any flicker of hesitation. This wasn't about love, or even about justice in the legal sense. This was about survival, about breaking free from the psychological chains he had wrapped around my mind. I stepped closer to the bed, the heavy chain held tight in my grip. My breath hitched, a silent battle raging within me. Could I do this? Could I truly become the monster he had tried to create? But then I thought of the countless nights spent shivering on the basement floor, the hollow echo of his dismissive words, the absolute despair that had threatened to consume me, and the answer came, cold and clear. Yes, I could, I had to. For every woman he might have sought to protect with his twisted love, for the me that died in that basement, I raised the chain, my muscles taut, every ounce of my being focused on this one singular act. The weight felt perfect, balanced. His breathing was deep, oblivious. He shifted slightly in his sleep, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. But he merely turned his head, settling back into a peaceful slumber. The anger, cold and sharp, ignited into a furious blaze. This man, who had stolen 5 years of my life, who had treated me as property, was sleeping soundly while I had lived in a waking nightmare. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought the chain down. Not on him, not yet. Instead, I moved swiftly, purposefully. I secured his right wrist to the sturdy bedpost, the metallic clang muted by the thick carpet, then his left, binding him to the other side. He stirred, groaning, his eyes fluttering open. A flicker of confusion, then terror, dawned in them as he saw me, standing over him, the remaining length of the chain in my hand. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out, only a choked gasp. He struggled, pulling against the chains, the bed shaking with his sudden, desperate movements, but the bonds held fast. He was trapped, just as I had been, and as he stared at me, his eyes wide with dawning horror, a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. He had built his cage. Now, he was inside it. His eyes, once filled with that chilling, possessive gaze, were now wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He thrashed against the chains, grunting, his body straining, but the heavy links held him fast. He opened his mouth, trying to scream, but only a strangled wheeze escaped. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face pulling. He tried to speak, to plead, but the words were unintelligible, lost in his rising panic. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years, not as an object of control, but as a terrifying, unpredictable force. And in that moment, I saw the fear, the confusion, the dawning realization of what was happening. It was a mirror of my own terror, magnified and reflected back at him. What are you doing? He finally managed to croak, his voice a raw whisper. I leaned closer, my voice low and steady, a stark contrast to his frantic desperation. I'm doing what you taught me, David. I'm keeping what's mine safe. I pulled the stolen diary from beneath my shirt, letting it fall open on the bed beside him. Remember this, David, your project, your perfect subject. His eyes darted to the diary, then back to me, the color draining from his face. He knew, he understood, the carefully constructed facade, the impenetrable control he believed he possessed, had crumbled. No, please, you don't understand, he stammered, his eyes pleading, darting around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I understand every single word you wrote, every twisted thought, every planned betrayal. I picked up one of his own thick leather belts from a nearby chair, its buckle glinting under the moonlight. He watched me, his eyes wide, a silent scream building in his throat. He understood what was coming. He understood the chilling symmetry of it all. He had sought to extinguish my spark, to break my will, to turn me into his compliant prisoner. But in doing so, he had forged me into something stronger, something unbreakable, and now, he was about to face the consequences of his own creation. The night was just beginning, and he was about to learn the true meaning of captivity. The belt felt supple, heavy, in my hand. He watched it, mesmerized by its movement, his eyes fixed on me with a desperate, animalistic fear. I didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, a ritual of reclaiming. I gagged him with a strip of cloth torn from a pillowcase, silencing his desperate pleas, his useless protests. The only sounds now were his ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my own heart, a drumbeat of emancipation. He thrashed harder against the chains, grunting and straining, his muscles coiling, but it was futile. The bed groaned under his efforts, but the chains held firm. I sat on the edge of the bed, just out of his reach, watching him, truly seeing him for the first time without the lens of fear or illusion. He was no longer the charming man who had swept me off my feet, nor the terrifying captor who had held me prisoner. He was just a man, bound and helpless, a stark reflection of the years I had endured in his basement. And in that reflection, I saw not a monster, but a victim of his own profound, terrifying sickness. The pity I felt was fleeting, immediately eclipsed by the searing memory of the cold concrete, the suffocating darkness, the silent screams. I spent the next few hours meticulously emptying his closets, pulling out every suit, every shirt, every meticulously organized possession. He watched, his eyes wide, his body tensing with each item I pulled out. I took his expensive watches, his wallets, anything of value. Then, I found his mobile phone, tucked under his pillow. He looked at it, then at me, a desperate plea in his eyes, as if begging me not to take away his last connection to the outside world. I picked it up, unlocked it, and scrolled through his contacts, his parents, his colleagues, his friends, all the people he had convinced that I was sick, that I was unstable. With his own phone, I opened the recording app. He stared at me, his eyes wide with dawning horror, realizing my intent. I held the phone close to him, letting it record his muffled sounds of struggle, his desperate, terrified grunts. Then, in a calm, clear voice, I began to speak, narrating the chilling details from his diary, describing the years of my captivity, the chains, the darkness, the psychological torment. I listed the dates, the specific acts of cruelty, the lies he had told to keep me isolated. He tried to shake his head, to deny, but the gag muffled his protests into desperate, pitiful noises. As the recording continued, the cold, hard facts pouring out, I saw something new in his eyes, not just fear, but a profound, gut-wrenching despair. He knew his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and I, his perfect subject, was dismantling it, piece by piece. The recording stretched on, my voice steady, relentless, cataloging the long years of his calculated cruelty. He lay there, bound and gagged, listening to his own heinous deeds recounted, with chilling precision. His eyes, initially wide with terror, now seemed to sink deeper into his skull, reflecting a desperate, hollow understanding. He had meticulously documented his crimes in his diary. Now, he was forced to hear them, exposed and undeniable. I included details only I, his captive, could know: the distinct smell of the basement, the specific brand of chains, the precise moments of his psychological torture. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the illusion of control he had so desperately maintained. When I felt I had recounted enough, when the recording was irrefutable proof of his depravity, I stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the weight of shattered lives and undeniable truth. I picked up his phone, still recording, and aimed it at his face, capturing his terrified, helpless expression. Then, I turned it to his bound wrists, documenting the chains, the exact replica of my own imprisonment. He squirmed, trying to hide his face, but there was nowhere to go. His meticulously built cage had become his own prison, and I was holding the key. I went back to the closet, selecting a single suit, his most expensive one, a dark blue bespoke piece he wore for special occasions. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, I took a pair of scissors from his dresser and systematically cut it into ribbons. He watched, his eyes following every snip, a low whine escaping his gagged throat. It was a symbolic act, a shredding of his public persona, his carefully cultivated image. He had stripped me of my dignity, my identity. Now, I was stripping him of his dot. Finally, I packed a small bag, not with many clothes, but with essentials. Some cash I found in his wallet, my identification, and most importantly, his phone, the diary, and a few printed photos I found. Innocuous family pictures that would serve as proof of my identity, of the woman I was before he stole my life. As dawn broke, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink, I stood over him one last time. He lay there, defeated, his eyes wide and vacant. I looked at the man who had chained me for 5 years, who had tried to extinguish my spark, and felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was about finally breaking free, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back at him. "You wanted to protect me, David," I whispered, my voice hoarse with unshed tears and years of pain. "You wanted me to be yours." I smiled then, a chilling, triumphant smile that held no warmth, no forgiveness. "Well, now you are mine. You're my prisoner, my project." I stepped out of the room, closed the door softly behind me, and locked it from the outside, turning the key twice. As I walked out of the house, into the crisp morning air, I didn't look back. The recording on his phone, the diary, the image of him chained to his bed, those were my final, undeniable proofs. And that's when I realized I hadn't just escaped, I had taken his entire world with me. The aftermath, the crisp morning air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the stale, suffocating air of the basement that had been my world for so long. The sun, a warm promise of a new day, touched my face, and for the first time in years, I felt it without the looming dread of impending darkness. I walked away from that house, not just physically, but spiritually. The chains were gone, not just from my wrists, but from my mind. I carried the weight of what I had done, yes, but it was a weight of empowerment, not despair. I found a small, anonymous motel on the outskirts of Lahore, far from the idyllic, yet sinister, small town where my nightmare had unfolded. The first thing I did was transfer the recording from David's phone, along with scans of his diary pages, to a cloud server, ensuring they would be safe, accessible, and undeniable. Then, with trembling fingers, I sent the anonymous link to a local news station, a few prominent domestic abuse organizations, and finally, to the police department in that quiet Kansas town. I included a detailed, chilling account, written from the perspective of an anonymous source, revealing the monster David truly was. I knew the risks. I knew he would eventually be found, and the investigation would begin. He would rage, he would deny, he would charm. But I also knew the evidence I had provided, from his own meticulous hand, from his own voice, would be too damning to ignore. The recordings, the diary, the image of him chained, they painted a picture of a man who was far from the respectable citizen everyone believed him to be. The next few days were a blur of nervous anticipation. I watched the news, devoured online articles, searching for any sign, any whisper, of my story breaking. And then, it did. A small article first, then a local news segment, and soon, the story of the respectable man found chained in his own bed, accused of holding his wife captive for 5 years, exploded. The details from the diary, the chilling premeditation, shocked everyone. His perfect life, his perfect facade, crumbled under the weight of his own dark secrets. I never contacted the authorities directly. I was a ghost, a whisper of justice. In the wind, I rebuilt my life, slowly, painstakingly, in a new city, under a new name. The scars remained, etched deep within my soul, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of my resilience, of the strength I found in the darkest of places. I may have lost 5 years, but I gained my freedom, my voice, and an unbreakable spirit. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if David, wherever he is now, still remembers the cold touch of his own chains, and the chilling realization that the spark he tried to extinguish ignited into a fire that consumed his world. He wanted control. He wanted to own me. And in the end, I took everything he had, leaving him with nothing but the echo of his own depravity.